I mean, I was in a 17-year legal battle with my ex-wife that drove me into bankruptcy. And I'm so grateful for that bankruptcy. There's no benign condition that presents like this. I'm certain this is stage 4 cancer. I'd get your affairs in order. The night before our wedding, she comes to me in tears. I had to write my own wedding vows to myself.
What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to another podcast. Today, I got Dave Guttman. How we doing, man?
Doing good, man. Great to be here.
Good. Yeah, we're out here in Scottsdale. Wanted to have a sit down. Dave is a very successful entrepreneur, very aligned as well when it comes to relationship dynamics. And we wanted to have a conversation together going over many, many subjects. So, Dave, for the guys that don't know you, give a little speech, a little rundown of who you are and what you do.
So, just turned 60 a few months ago, been a serial entrepreneur for the last 35 years. Back when it made a little bit of sense, I went to Brown for a computer science degree. I was a Division I college wrestler. Then I went to Wharton for my MBA. But I also know those degrees are bullshit. I actually ripped up my Wharton MBA on Dan Fleischman's podcast. That's how valuable I think it is. But I've been a serial entrepreneur. I've had some interesting speed bumps along my journey, from the misdiagnosis. I was told I had 6 months to live when I was 24. I've had a lot of ups and downs professionally, but I've also had some 8- and 9-figure exits, and that sort of put me where I am now. And now I'm in a place where I feel really fortunate that I only have to do things I like with people I enjoy, doing things I'm interested in.
Now, when you were growing up, obviously, we were talking about this even before we turned the cameras on. The world was a lot different. And yeah, as you said, went to school and things like this. What was your outlook over the next several years as you were developing as a young man in like your late teens, early 20s, going into college and stuff like that?
So I grew up, my dad was a math and physics major and actually embraced technology. In fact, my dad wrote kind of an early precursor to AI, believe it or not. So back then they called it a 4th generation language. So my dad was an entrepreneur. He had a technology consulting company where he would build large systems for, big companies, Ford Foundation, things like that. And then he basically wrote these programs that would write the programs. So he would design the screens, he would design the reports, he would design the workflow, the logic flow, and then it would generate the COBOL code. And Ford Foundation was one of his clients, and they said, you always deliver on time and on budget. Nobody does that. How do you do that? And he said, well, I wrote this program that writes the programs. And they're like, well, would you sell it to us? And he's like, sure, for $1 million. Thinking, no, there's no way they'll say yes. And they said, absolutely. Well, that company eventually IPO'd. So I always knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, watching my dad's journey, both because of his success, but also because he eventually got pushed out of his own company because he thought he was good at some things he wasn't good at. And so I wanted to make sure I knew enough about all areas of business that I could never get bullshitted about anything. So I didn't have to know how to do them all necessarily, but I wanted to know I knew enough about it. And back then, the only way to really do it was to go and get an MBA and get some experience there, which I did. But I was also I was a very competitive athlete, played 4 sports in high school. And actually, it's funny, even though I went to 2 Ivy League schools, my identity was really more as an athlete than it was as someone who was intellectual. In fact, I consider myself, I am still severely dyslexic.
Oh, wow, okay.
I was tested at a 3rd grade reading level in 7th grade. And then once they identified my problem, my parents got me some help, and I went from a 3rd grade reading level to a 9th grade reading level in 3 months.
Oh, there you go.
So, whatever. Again, I had 2 parents that loved me, that told me I could do anything I set my mind to. I felt really fortunate. I had an older brother who was a really good athlete too, so that's why I was a good athlete, was he wouldn't play with me if I sucked, and he was 3.5 years older, so when I played with kids my age, I was always good by comparison.
Yeah, he kind of set the standard for you to level up pretty quickly, so then whenever you did wrestle guys your age, it was like probably more okay.
Well, and he beat the shit out of me every day of my childhood, so he toughened me up, so when I had to fight someone my size, it wasn't that bad.
Yeah, you're like, oh, this is easy. Yeah. But no, I think it's super interesting. A lot of guys that grow up as really like top tier athletes that are also smart, a lot of them can take that for granted in a way and not still have that inner drive, especially when the parents are supportive and your dad was, successful as well with this. What do you think allowed you to stay on the narrow path of developing your skill sets while still being already a high achieving individual at this point in your life?
So while I did grow up and I grew up middle class like you, maybe upper middle class towards the end, But my mom was an alcoholic, so I helped her detox from alcohol when I was 9. So I never had a drop of alcohol until I was 35 because I was freaked out maybe it'll be genetic. But that even ended up being a blessing in disguise because once I started to feel peer pressure, 12, 13, 14, when kids start to experiment with drugs and alcohol, like there was no amount of peer pressure that was going to get me to drink. So, once you've kind of marched to the beat of your own drummer and not follow the path of everyone else, once it gets a lot easier. I'm sure you can relate. Yeah. It's a lot easier after. And my dad, even though he was a workaholic, he was working all the time, he was also, morbidly obese. So he was, 5'8", 270 pounds.
Oh, shit.
But when I was 10, he went into Overeaters Anonymous and he lost all the weight in about 10 months, and he's kept it off ever since. So 50 years, my dad has not put a single complex carbohydrate in his mouth, not had a single drop of alcohol.
Wow.
He's weighed and measured everything he's put in his body since I was 10 years old. So in both my parents' cases, while there was struggles there, I saw both of them choose to overcome those struggles. And so I just grew up with the sense that I could do anything, anyone could do anything they set their mind to, and it was more of a choice than, it's like, how do you deal with what life hands you versus, having any kind of a victim mindset. And I guess, too, that the chaos of my house, my brother was always in trouble. He was not a nice brother growing up. We get along great now. In fact, that's why I moved out here. And my parents, again, things were definitely not harmonious, to say the least. I couldn't wait to get out of Dodge. So for me, the second I could get my driver's license so I could have a little bit of freedom, and then as soon as I could go off to college, I was so excited to go to college. I love both my parents. I was close with both of them. But I felt like the only person I could really count on was myself, and I think that's what got me to be so driven, was I just wanted to get out of the chaos in my house.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a new, you couldn't kind of expect certain things some days, what was going to be going on back at home.
I remember every time we would have, because we actually would go on nice family vacations. I kid you not, every single family vacation that was ever planned was canceled and rescheduled 10 times. And just as a kid, like the anxiety and stress, like, we're going to Disneyland. No, we're not. We're going to, no, we're not. It's like everyone was like that. And so I just like, fuck this, man.
Yeah. You knew that wasn't for you. And this
not
is
for me.
Stupid.
Yeah.
I want to jump into, a couple of years moving forward where you had a speech for TEDx. Before we even jump into other business sides of things, this is something that was actually very touching for me when I watched it. And it was your story, being 24, being told you had about 6 months left to live. And I'll just let you tell that story. How did this happen? And go ahead.
So it was such a weird situation. I was living in Chicago at the time, but I was on a consulting project in St. Louis. So I wasn't going to see my normal doctor. And I had asthma as a kid, and so I would just get bronchitis like once a year like clockwork. And I knew exactly what it felt like because I got it all the time. Anyway, so I'm having a little trouble breathing one day, so I'm assuming it's just bronchitis. I go to see a doctor, not my normal doctor. And, so he gives me antibiotics. He's like, oh, it's probably bronchitis. He gives me antibiotics, and I don't get better. So, 10 days, 2 weeks later, I go back in. He said, well, let's take an x-ray. Maybe you have walking pneumonia. That was what he was thinking. So I get an x-ray first thing before work, so 7:30 in the morning, something like that.
Yeah.
I get what I now realize in hindsight is a panicked phone call around lunchtime. Hey, Mr. Guttman, can you come back in this afternoon? And I don't think anything of it. I'm 24 years old. I don't drink. I don't smoke. I work out like crazy. I eat like a monk. There's no way.
Athlete too, yeah.
It doesn't even cross my mind. I just have a case of bronchitis. So I go in, and the waiting room is packed, right? And they immediately usher me into I'm like, oh, that's not a good sign.
Yeah.
What's that about? So the doctor comes in, again, not my normal doctor, and he puts my x-rays up on the screen, and he's like, he traces this circle around the size of a softball in the middle of my chest. He's like, your lungs are clear. It's not that. He said, this mass is the size of a softball, and it's pinching your trachea shut. That's why you're having trouble breathing. And he's like, and before he said this, he's like, I know you're going to think I'm a quack, but I was a thoracic surgeon for over 30 years. There's no benign condition that presents like this. I'm certain this is stage 4 cancer. And he goes, not only that, and again, he was a little bit nicer about it. He said, but not only that, there's no way it could be that big and not have metastasized.
Does that mean spread?
Yeah, spread, yeah. So it was like, whether it's Hodgkin's or non-Hodgkin's, again, he said it nicer. He goes, it really won't matter because it's just going to be too late. He's like, first I'm thinking, that's exactly what I thought. You're a quack. There's no way. So he said, look, I know the head of oncology at Barnes Hospital, which is the best hospital in St. Louis. I called in a favor. You'll get a CT scan tomorrow. He's going to see you in a couple days. And he goes, because I'm sure you want a second opinion. I'm like, yeah, damn straight.
Yeah.
And again, most of me's thinking, oh, he's probably wrong, but he seemed so certain that I was freaking out. But I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell my parents, didn't tell anybody. But then 2 or 3 days later, after the CT scan, and I see the head of oncology, and he says, 6 months. Like, he said exactly the same thing. That's what the first doctor said. He goes, I think you have 6 months. And they weren't even saying, like, 10% chance you'll be fine. They were giving me virtually none. So then I finally tell my parents, and they're like, look, and my dad's like, those fucking Midwest doctors don't know what the hell they're doing. I know someone at Sloan Kettering, best cancer hospital in the world at the time. We'll clear up this bullshit. And I flew to New York the next week. And this time, my parents, who, by the way, were divorced at this point, they're never in the same room. Mm-hmm. So it's me and my 2 divorced parents and one of the top oncologists at Sloan Kettering. And he's going through my file, and he literally said to me, I'd get your affairs in order. Yeah. Those exact words. And my parents, I mean, they were freaking out. They were trying to, do their best to not show me how, terrified they were. And for me, I just got accepted into Wharton, and they told me I'd be dead before I enrolled in the fall. And for me, the thing that was so upsetting about the whole thing was I busted my ass. 4 sports, wrestling's a really tough sport, cutting weight all the time, getting my way through college, getting my way into business school. And I'm like, for what? All that fucking work for nothing. Yeah. And I'm going to be dead in 6 months. And what it did was it forced me to think about, other than some family and friends being sad for a little bit, it will not have mattered that I lived. And that bothered me a lot. And I don't actually believe in legacy in the way people normally think about it. Like, do I think it'll matter in 1,000 years that I lived? No, I don't, right? With that being said, the fact that I was going to have such little of an impact was just something that bothered me. And I from that point forward, I'm like, look, if I can, the part that was the biggest mindfuck of the whole thing was when I went into Sloan Kettering for my biopsy. So I'd already seen the oncologist, and he's like, it's game over. He's like, but we're going to go through the motions. We're going to take a biopsy. We'll try some experimental stuff that won't work. Again, they said it nicer, but that's basically what they're saying. And so I'm in there for a biopsy, and it's only supposed to be 30 minutes. And as soon as the doctor opens me up, he's like, he can tell right away it's a cyst and not a tumor, which means it's not cancer. So now, because he's already scrubbed in, he's not going to, go and tell my parents. So instead of 30 minutes, I'm on the table for 3 hours because he's trying to break it up and drain it as best he can. So he comes out, my parents are freaking out in the waiting room because, what the fuck, why is it 3 hours? Yeah. And he finally comes out, he's like, we fucked up, it's not cancer.
That's a crazy
but now,
twist.
Because I was on the operating table for 3 hours, they insisted I stay overnight. So now I'm in a cancer hospital, and everyone around me is dying. The guy in the bed next to me just had his leg amputated with bone cancer. So that whole night, I am staring at the curtain that's in between our 2 beds, and I'm thinking, that could be me. But for this, again, now I'm actually feeling unbelievably fortunate as opposed to poor me.
What a pendulum, switch.
Oh, dude, it was crazy. And, at that point, I decided, you know what? I still am going to try to be very successful. I mean, I was very ambitious. I'm like, but I'm going to make it the side effect instead of the goal. And the part that was ironic about that decision was I actually think I got to the success faster than I would have otherwise.
Why do you say that?
Because no man is an island, right? And what I realized is, and again, I didn't learn it all right there. I mean, I had a career after that, obviously, and I had mentors, professional mentors and stuff that I learned things about leadership and how to scale businesses and things like that. But what I saw was that if you can get all the people around you and get everyone rowing in the same direction, you're going to go so much faster than if you're trying to do it all on your own. And if you'd asked me at 24 if I was happy, I wouldn't have understood the question. I wouldn't have. I was just like, what are you talking about? What's this happiness you speak of? I was like, I've got to do with this shit I got to accomplish. What do you mean?
I think also, which is super interesting, is you probably had a new perspective on life afterwards and realized that, like you said too, a lot of shit in life doesn't even matter because it can be gone like this and it's out of your control. So what was the biggest pivot you believe that your mindset was afterwards, now going into Wharton and going into school and then trying to be as successful as you can as a side effect?
One, I stopped taking myself so seriously, and I stopped taking life so seriously. Meaning, don't get me wrong, I'm an intense guy and I want to be successful and I want to do certain things, but I wasn't psychotic about it anymore. I'm like, I have to enjoy the journey. if it's just about the destination, who knows when it's going to be game over, you know? And so I'm like, that just changed my perspective and forcing me to say, look, no matter what, I have to enjoy the journey too, or it's not worth doing. That's the shift that, that combined with having a daughter just made me so much more empathetic, so much more patient. One of the things I've learned in business too is it's rarely every business hits speed bumps. It's rarely the speed bump that dooms the business. It's the under or the overreaction to that speed bump that usually tanks the business. And it just taught me to, I'm not afraid of death. I'm genuinely not afraid of death. I'm not looking forward to it. I'm not hoping it comes early, but like I'm okay with it. And so the fact is, when bad shit happens, like I became CEO of this Forex prop trading firm in Miami. My first day, we had our MetaTrader license pulled, and we lost 60% of our revenue my first day. So nothing I could have figured out in due diligence. And so here I am, CEO of a company, 60% of our revenue disappeared the first day I started. Over the next 6 months, I built the revenue back, got it above where it even started, and it's because I didn't panic. And I didn't panic because I'm like, I ain't dead. I'm not dying. My daughter's not dying. My wife's not dying. Everything else I can handle.
I love that mindset, because that was something that I kind of experienced as well, that we talked about previously. Once somebody experiences death, or a near-death experience, I should say, your point of view and your lens towards the world and the experience of life is so different, and you get to experience it in a way that I would say the biggest thing too for me was not take everything so seriously. If you can go through a really, really traumatizing period where whether you experience a death or you almost die, or you're being told you're going to die, and you come out on the other side, I mean, nothing else is going to destroy you mentally. I think that is such a resilient aspect, as well as with the resilience when it comes to the stress of running a large business like that. Everything else is like, oh, I've been through harder things. Like, I'm game to do this. You
have to reframe everything. I was on this podcast with this woman who, unfortunately, for her patients, is a psychologist, and she frames everything through a victim lens. I don't frame anything that's happened. Like, in fact, I can trace none of my good qualities to anything good that happened in my life. All of my best qualities come from hardship and things I had to overcome. And so when bad things happen, when challenging things happen, I mean, I was in a 17-year legal battle with my ex-wife that drove me into bankruptcy. And I'm so grateful for that bankruptcy. Like, I appreciate wealth so much more. Like, things like that, the things that end up being, at the time seem like they're a disaster, almost always end up being these amazing blessings. They're just hard to see it in the moment.
Do you want to jump into that real quick?
Which part?
Let's do it. I want to jump into your ideology towards relationships before you ended up getting divorced. Were you having good success with dating girls when you were younger? How was your psychology towards dating, like in long-term relationships at this point? I
was always pretty successful with girls. I would say certainly once I got to college. In high school, middle school, I was actually pretty popular, but high school, because I didn't drink. In fact, I was the vice president of Students Against Drunk Driving the cool kids home from the parties I wasn't invited to. So that was me in high school. Couldn't buy a date. My senior year, the most popular girl asked me out, and that's who I dated my senior year, and that's who I went to the prom with. And then from that point on, through college, I was always very successful with women, because I was comfortable at that point. I was comfortable in my own skin, and I was ambitious, and I was like, look, I know I'm going to be successful. Now back then, it was such a different thing. The only way you could meet somebody was to meet them in person. You would place literally want ads in a newspaper. They used to call them personal ads. It was the most bizarre freaking thing. There was no date. There was no internet, right?
Yeah.
So, in fact, I remember I had a good friend when I was, my first job after college, I worked for Anderson Consulting, and one of my close friends, whenever we would go to lunch together a lot, and every single time I'd see a pretty girl, I would go up and, ask for her number. And I'd get no a lot more than yes, right? But at the end of the day, my friend would be like, how do you do that? I'm like, well, if I don't ask her out, the chance she's going to go out with me is 0. So it might not be much better than 0, but it's a little better than 0. So why would I choose the lower probability outcome? And I've heard no before, so one more no is not going to make a big difference. So I was always fairly comfortable with that. With that being said, because dating was a different thing back then, I mean, I should have known better than to marry my first wife. In fact, we got engaged. I called the engagement off, and then my dumb ass got re-engaged, and that's when we got married. And back then, the problem was both my dad and my brother, my older brother, neither one of them were relationship role models. They didn't have good relationships to really understand women. I understood women way better than either of them did. Mm-hmm. And so I didn't really have anyone to ask, honestly. And again, there were no online dating coaches or anything like that. There were no YouTube videos you could watch. Yeah. That wasn't a thing. There weren't even books you could read. Yeah. Right? The game hadn't been written yet. So, so I basically, it's the inertia of, hey, at the time I've been dating my then girlfriend for 5 years. We were 30. We didn't fight. We still had sex. The sex was good. We had some superficial things in common. We both like to work out all the time. And so I was like, she was attractive. I'm like, that's good enough, right? And so we got engaged and eventually we got married. And even though at the time, I'll say this, I never said this on camera before. So this should have been the red flag that got me to call the wedding off. So maybe 4 or 5 months before the wedding, my fiance at the time says, hey, we should write our own vows. I'm like, sure, no problem. Let's do that. She buys 5 books on how to write wedding vows, and then I just write my wedding vows. Anyway, a couple months before, hey, Chris, have you gotten around to writing your wedding vows? Is you doing it? She's like, oh, I'll get to it. A month before, 2 weeks before. The night before our wedding, she comes to me in tears because, she had asked me to read her my vows. And, I'm a pretty good writer, right? I wrote my TED Talk, right?
Yeah.
So I think because she was afraid hers wouldn't be as good as mine, she just was frozen and she couldn't write anything. I had to write my own wedding vows to myself.
Holy shit.
So on our wedding day, I'm telling you, if anyone had said to me, just asked me the question, Dave, are you sure you want to get married? I would have pulled the ripcord.
Oh.
But nobody did. So I got married, and once we were married, I was like, look, I just threw myself into it fully. I'm going to be the best husband I can possibly be, and I'm going to hopefully help her become the kind of partner that will be the kind of partner that I want. That didn't work so well.
Yeah. It sounds so good on paper to do that, but if you're already trying to, they should show up for themselves with that same attitude. You know what I mean? It's crazy that, you never told me that, even at breakfast, where, the night before, she didn't have anything.
Nothing. Not even like the.
Yeah, like SpongeBob, where it says the.
No, not even that.
No, that's okay. So, because here's a big thing too. A lot of guys that do good casually dating aren't also going to do the same and do good in a long-term relationship, because they're two different dynamics. Would you say that would be something more fitting that you kind of fell into, or were you good at both?
I think I was pretty good at both. Partially too because I've been so career-minded. I wanted to have a good relationship, but I wanted that relationship that would be sort of a force multiplier for what I was trying to do professionally. I didn't want it to be a distraction. I didn't want it to be, I didn't want to be with someone high maintenance. I didn't want to, and that was part of the reason why I made a bad choice. Was my ex-wife was not high maintenance. The problem was she was no maintenance, meaning once we were married. And actually, I should say, once we were married and we had our child, we had my daughter, I didn't exist. I mean, I think if I could have been struck by lightning, I don't know if she would have noticed.
What?
And we had sex twice last year and a half we were married.
I remember you told me that at breakfast.
Yeah, it's
I was like, what the hell?
It's like, and I remember her saying, look, I'm miserable, and if you say you love me, how happy can you be if your partner's miserable? And I'm like, look, I saw my parents, fight for 25 years. I said, well, not 25 years, 18 years until I went to college. And I was like, I'm not doing that. So I'm not going to be in an unhappy relationship. And I also don't think that's a good role model for our daughter. I don't want her to see us. Because what I came to realize was, it wasn't even just that my wife didn't love me. She didn't even like me very much. And I thought I'm a pretty likable guy. So it's like, I'm not doing that. And I will say, this will sound weird, but my decision to get divorced is probably the single biggest decision I'm most proud of that I've ever made in my entire life, because everyone, and I mean everyone, zero exceptions, is telling me not to do it. My daughter was only one. how can you leave your daughter? I'm like, I'm not leaving my daughter. I'm leaving a loveless marriage, and I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
Like, we did therapy. Therapy just made it even more clear that we were not well suited to each other. My daughter, when she was like 8 or 9 years old, said to me once, she's like, Dad, I don't know if I've ever met two people more poorly suited for each other than you and Mom. And she's not wrong. And
As
this
a
is
little
her
girl.
like 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
So it was the right decision. And I didn't have any friends, you know, at that time. I was 35 when I got divorced. That I could even talk to about it. So everyone's telling me not to get divorced. Everyone's telling me to just stick it out. And I'm like, I did the research, and it's like, look, get divorced before they're 2 or wait till they go to college. And I wasn't waiting until they went to college. So to me, I felt like the decision was, well, emotionally very difficult, was intellectually very simple.
That's where emotions kind of get things to be a little bit challenging.
Yeah.
Especially when you have a kid with somebody. I don't have that, but still, I can only imagine the extra intensity of that. You're 35 at this point. Let's back it up a few years. I want to know exactly what you're doing career-wise, business-wise. Run me through that, what that looked like at this point.
So I was a computer science major, so I did computer programming for a few years after college before I went to get my MBA. And then I worked for Anderson Consulting right out of college, which at the time was the biggest consulting company in the world. Now it's called Accenture. Back then it was Anderson Consulting. And then after business school, everyone in business school, there's so much groupthink. Everyone goes in either into finance, corporate finance, or Wall Street, or they go into consulting. And I actually had 3 pretty good consulting offers, all of which I turned down to do something called a search fund. And what a search fund is, you get basically angel investors to give you a small amount of seed capital. You take a pittance of a salary, I think I was drawing a $50,000 salary when, you know, my other job offers were for $150,000, right? And this was in 1994, when that was a lot of money.
Oh yeah.
And so I making $50,000 instead. But the thing was, we would find a company to buy. They would provide us the equity capital to buy it, and then I would get to run it, and I would get 10% of the equity.
Okay.
So what I knew I wanted to learn on someone else's dime. I had no operating experience at that point. I'd never run anything. I'd been a software developer, and I'd managed teams, but that was as much as I'd done. I went to business school when I was 25. So that experience of the search fund. So we bought a call center business. We did about a dozen acquisitions, and I learned how to scale businesses, you know, do M&A stuff, which I'd never done, raise capital, which I'd never done. So that was an amazing experience for me. What happened was there was this 3-lady team that I had met from at one of the conferences for our industry. It was in the call center space. So we were rolling up call centers. We bought these small call centers and we rolled them up. And they worked for the largest company in our space. It was called Pro Communications. And their CEO was the ex-COO of Nextel. And he was a notorious asshole. And these women had no equity in it, but they were doing all the work, and he was taking all the credit. And I kind of knew that, and so I courted them, and I said, look, you can, you know, stay where you are, be unappreciated, and take orders from him, or you can come here and tell me what to do. Because I was at least self-aware enough to know that I knew I didn't know what the hell I was doing. So I brought them in. I basically, you know, I gave them equity. And even though Sharon, who was my COO, technically reported to me, I worked for her. Her leadership style is my leadership style.
Okay.
She was a phenomenal leader, phenomenal manager, and just a great business person. And you know, she taught me how to do acquisitions. She taught me how to. Oh my God, she taught me so many things.
What do you think your biggest takeaway, as like a young guy jumping into that space with no experience, was? Was it more so just like I got to get my shit together, or I have to like really like double down on relationships with people? What do you think the biggest lever pull, figuratively, here was for you?
Well, what I learned actually, and I should just take a half a step back. So when I was applying to business school, this is how little thought I gave to stuff. I read one article, I think it was in Business Week. I don't know if you even know what Business Week is. It was a business magazine back then that was big, kind of like a Wall Street Journal, but a magazine version. And I read this article that said the most successful people have an undergraduate degree in computer science and engineering and an MBA from a top 3 business school. So I only applied to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. I'm like, if I don't get in, I'm not going to go. Because you know, even back then, between lost income and what it was going to cost me, it was $250,000. So I'm like, if I don't get into those, I'm not going to go. I didn't get into Harvard or Stanford. I got into Wharton. And Wharton would have been my first choice, but for the fact that what they had that was really interesting to me was they had something called the Small Business Development Center. It's an SBA funded thing where if you got in, and they only picked 5% of the people that applied to it, you would provide free consulting services to Philadelphia businesses in exchange for them paying 2/3 of your tuition tax-free.
Wow.
So it was a great deal, but I didn't know I would get in. So since I didn't get into Harvard and Stanford, I really worked hard to make sure I got picked for the SBDC. And so for 1.5 of the 2 years I was there, I provided consulting services to 30 different Philadelphia area businesses in every functional area. So I built a financial forecasting model for a company that was raising venture capital for at the time, the top satellite tracking software company in the world. They've been on the front page of the Wall Street Journal. I did a market entry strategy for consumer electronics product, which I didn't even know what a consumer electronics product was. And so I learned by doing. And that's ultimately what I learned is, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to be serious about doing something like my dad did, I'm going to need to get some real operating experience. And so that's why I wanted to do the search fund, is I'm going to learn by doing. That was my big takeaway, is you learn by doing, not by reading. And yeah, you can learn some things by reading or watching a podcast, though there weren't podcasts back then. You can learn that way, but the way you really internalize things is you have to do stuff.
Yeah, it's one thing for theory, and then it's taking action, which is you can't outsmart not taking action and just trying to be all theory based. It just doesn't translate the same.
And failure, look, it's not really failure in business. It's actually quite hard, I think, to really fail. Most people just give up too soon.
Their pain tolerance is too little compared to if they could push through certain things.
And by the way, like there's never been a company in the history of the world that had a business plan, that did the business plan, and then that's what happened, and they sold a company. I mean, if you know the story behind Slack, they built Slack as an internal tool. I forget what the other business was. They raised capital for something else, and they built Slack just as an internal tool to communicate with the engineering team, and it wasn't going to work. They were going to have to shut the whole company down. So they said, well, we do have this one tool we use for this internal communication. We can either give back the couple of $1 million we have left to our investors, or we can take a swing at this. And that's how Slack became a $1 billion company.
Insane.
It's nothing like what the original business was. Most businesses go through some kind of significant pivot. And that's what I'm saying. Like, if you give it too soon, oftentimes you miss the opportunity.
Yeah, even like when you say that, you're familiar with WAP, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so same thing. They started as a sneaker trading bot back years and years and years ago when exclusive drops had like the hype that they used to. And now they're, an online course catalog and a payment processor. Like, what a completely different...
And Van Basis too, that's now Comma. They did the same pivot. They did a similar, different kind of starting business, but a completely different business, which is why they had to change their name.
Yes, yeah. Then that was really recent, about a week ago.
Yeah, they just recently did.
Crazy.
Yep.
My audience is typically between 20 to 30, 35 as well. What are like your two biggest takeaways for business success, right? And two biggest takeaways for romantic relationship success? Because a lot of guys that are really good at business don't really translate into having really good romantic success, and it can be vice versa too. But I would like to hear your opinion and your input.
So one of the things I learned disappointingly late in my career is that the two most important things I look for in business, whether it's someone I might partner with, someone I might mentor, someone I might do a partnership with, even a vendor partnership, I look for humility and I look for curiosity. Especially with people that I'm going to work with directly. If they don't have curiosity and humility, it's a non-starter for me. The reason curiosity is so important is it doesn't matter what your starting point is. You could be the dumbest person in the room, but if you're the most curious person, you will eventually be the smartest person in the room. And the reason humility is so important is one of the biggest Achilles heels of people that are smart and capable is that they're smart and capable. And they become emotionally invested in being right. They become emotionally invested in being the smartest person in the room. So you take your Jordan Petersons, your Ben Shapiros, your Alex Hormozis. When your identity is associated with that, it becomes very difficult to near impossible to take in new information. And so it makes it really hard to continue to be, a person that evolves when your identity is attached to being right. And so, if you're brilliant, and most of us are not, you're still going to be wrong something like 30% of the time.
Yeah.
How can I be so sure this isn't part of that 30%? So while I have very strong opinions, they're loosely held. So I would say that, be humble, be curious, strong opinions, loosely held.
I like that.
On the relationship side, I mean, I could talk for hours, maybe even days about that. But at the end of the day, what it comes down to is instead of focusing on, it's funny, the analogy, but there's a correlation between this in business and in relationships that I hadn't thought about till just now, is in business I always tell people, run your business really, really well, and that will maximize your exit possibilities. Run your business from day one like you want to sell it. Not like you're always looking to sell it, but that, the better your cash flow, the better your customer retention, the better your employee retention, the better your revenue growth rate. The better those things are, the more options you're going to have in terms of exiting a business. Relationships are the same way, or the ability to attract a good romantic partner, I should say it that way. The better version of myself that I am, the more romantic options I'm going to have. And so, one, being a good person, being well-rounded, being healthy and fit, treating people kindly, being fair-minded, being decent, looking for ways to help other people. These are all things that make your journey through life happier. But I would argue that if you can do those things, you're also much more likely to attract the kind of partner that you want. And, for me, the other big mistake I think people make is they have their checklist of things that they want. I actually think it's fine to have a checklist of things that you won't accept. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm not going to accept someone who's not fair-minded. I'm not going to accept someone who's combative. I'm not going to accept someone who's lazy. I'm not going to accept someone who doesn't have curiosity and a growth mindset. So I think it's fine to have a checklist like that. But I think if you have a checklist of things they have to have, my second and final wife, who I love dearly, she would have not stacked up very well for the checklist of things I wanted. She didn't work out, though she was thin and attractive. She didn't really work out at the time. Her diet was crap. She was disorganized. She didn't have a lot of relationship experience. She wasn't the best communicator, again, from lack of experience. I didn't have a checklist like that. The checklist was I wanted someone, she was very intelligent, she was very open-minded, and she was very curious. Mm. She had all the raw materials. And we've been together 10 years, married for 3, never said an unkind word to each other. Best romantic partner I've ever had. But I think that the reason why I was able to attract and to keep somebody like her is because I became the best version of myself.
I love that. I think a really, really good way to phrase that too, and I've heard this in business or even just life, if you're trying to improve your life quality, is instead of adding new things, get rid of the negative ones first. This kind of goes into, I have a checklist of things I won't tolerate, opposed to I have a checklist of things that I want. Because if she has all the things that you want and has a lot of the things that you don't like too, it's still not going to work. So
it's easier to get sucked in if they have the things you like the sex is great, and she's really hot, and she's some of the things I want, but she's a freaking pain in the ass, and we argue all the time, and I would agree. It's like that. You can get sucked in by them having the ones on the checklist you want.
Completely, and it kind of can be toxic. Dave, where can the people find you and go to your channel and go through your podcast and get to learn more about you and your guests?
So I'm all across all channels. I'm at Real Dave Guttman. I read all my own messages. You can DM me on any of the platforms. GuttmanMedia.com is my website, and check out, if you type in Dave Guttman and TED Talk, you'll get to see my TED Talk.
You guys should watch it because he gave the story here, but it was a lot more. It felt more intense on stage, but it was really good. It was really good. But I appreciate you guys watching. If you made it to the end of this video here, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Check out Dave's channel as well. Subscribe to him. And I'll see you guys in the next podcast.